honestly, I'm on a roll here with these videos about how much it sucks to be a cyclist in Toronto. How much of that is intentional, deliberate, and because of these really crappy, because of the commuter barriers. Now, this is my commuter barriers map that I started a little while ago, just to get a better understanding of, like, to be able to visualize the city. And I want to just draw your attention to these things. All these things are rail lines and all of the parcels of property which are completely blocked off to, like, commuting because of it. So these are all the spots where, like, all the streets end in dead ends and stuff like that, so that I can figure out what actual streets go through and how to get to, when I need to get from one place to the other. These basically kind of, these and big highways, of course, and waterways, these are the things that define neighborhoods, because they restrict people walking through them, cycling through them, driving through them, and stuff like that. And they create these choke points like this, there, and there, and there, and there, and over there, and right there, and there, and there. Those are all the only spots where you can get through, and it's kind of like a reduction in the availability of roads and stuff. You can see, within these neighborhoods, you can navigate through on all these streets pretty normally, but in order to get between them, you have to cross these big barriers. Like, of course, High Park is a huge barrier because between Bloor Street and the Queensway, there's no way to go east and west, and that's just simply because of the waterway. But we also make our own barriers, like these rail lines and stuff. So I wanted to just, give everybody a practical illustration of, like, why cycling is so unpopular in Toronto, and what we can do about it, just by showing you what it takes to ride your bike between Little Portugal and Parkdale. Everybody thinks Little Portugal is part of Parkdale or part of Little Italy. No, it's its own hood, damn it. People have to make this trek all the time. Parkdale residents are, a lot of them use their bikes. That's way above the 3% that people keep quoting. Same thing with Little Portugal residents. This whole area right here is the hot spot for cycling in Toronto, this ward right here. And you can see why, because it's so permeable. But as soon as you try to go to Parkdale, which is where Bike Pirates is, right? So you have to go to Parkdale. You got to go through one of these things. So you got to choose your adventure, and your adventure is kind of dictated on where you're coming from. If you're coming from Trinity Bellwoods, you're going to Parkdale. This is a really common trip. Well, you're going to have to pass through one of, like, 3 intersections, and they're all terrible. Or one of 3, rail crossings, and they're all pretty terrible. So I'm going to show you from northwest to southeast all the available ways to get in and out of Parkdale. And keep in mind, you don't have a choice. You have to use one of these routes. There's no ways around this array of terrible access points. The first one, I'm not going to bother with Sororan. First one is Lansdowne. So here's Lansdowne from a bird's eye view. This is how you have to get in and out of the hood. Big rail crossing up in there. Lansdowne is terrible all the way from Queen. So basically getting to this crossing from inside of Parkdale as a cyclist, you just don't want to do it. You want to get to the closest you can possibly get on Lansdowne, which is basically right here, and then you're making the best of it on this. So you're doing that, and then if you can get to it, this is what you have to bike through on your way in and out. And just like Runnymede, it's big enough to fit 2 cars, and it often does. So drivers have nothing in their way of using the bike lane as a passing lane, and they do. And there's no safety provision for cyclists up in here. And of course the sidewalk is too narrow to walk your bike while sharing it with a pedestrian. The next available place that you could possibly use is Brock. Now this is probably the most cyclist-friendly way to get in and out of the neighborhood, and it's terrible. You can get to Brock fairly easily on both sides, though. That's the cool thing about it. So once you get to the crossing, all you have to do is fight with drivers for access to the north side so that you can get into it, because drivers, they want to fight. There's parked cars all the time over here. There's always somebody coming through here and cutting off cyclists. So it's a pain, but it's manageable. And it's not wide enough to admit two cars. So basically, Brock is like certified cyclist friendly from a Toronto perspective. Like, everything's relative. Of course, as soon as you get up here, you got cars parked here, you're getting doored and all this kind of stuff, and right about there, the lane evaporates, and you're supposed to share this. And actually, sharing Brock with drivers, it's not so bad. Just go right in the middle of the lane, and you'll be all good. Not all good. They will use their cars to attack you, but not frequently. Of course, as soon as you get to Queen, everything becomes terrible. So have fun competing with these drivers for a piece of Queen, but you basically just have to get across Queen so that you can get into the back alley here and actually traverse Parkdale in comfort, safety, and style. And you can go down to King, of course. So you basically just want to get through this terrible part of Queen, where Queen meets Brock, and then you're basically home free, coming in or out of the hood. The next place is Dufferin and Queen, and this is a really this intersection is like an old warlord. It's just an old warlord of an intersection. It's like an old It's like responsible for many, many, many cyclist deaths and pedestrian deaths, and of course a lot of driver deaths, but mostly cyclists and pedestrians. This very famous school teacher died right there. I almost have died several times in this intersection because this is it. This is coming into it from the north side. There's always a bus parked here, and then if you try to get past the bus from the left, the bus will actually try to merge into you, into this lane, so you can't pass the bus on the left. You can't there's not really enough space on this sidewalk here to walk through. As you can see, there's only room enough for one pedestrian to use it at a time. Same thing with this corner here. There's really no room for anybody to congregate or stuff like that, so it's always full of people, and they spill out over here, so you got to go around them and stuff like that. So this intersection, I think alone probably employs at least 100 full-time auto and oil workers, because it stands between Trinity Bellwoods and Parkdale, and it does a really good job of excluding cyclists. It's really good. This is the underpass going along Queen, and there's barely enough room on that sidewalk to ride next to some pedestrians if you don't have a bunch of stuff standing in there. But no, it's a total cyclist killer, this whole stretch. The edges of the of Queen here are rough, and drivers will want to push you into them. As you can see, this area really is designed to kill cyclists and sell cars, and it does a great job of both. And then next up we've got King Street, which, if you can imagine an underpass worse than the last one we watched, well, then you'll be bored with this. So this is the King Street tunnel. So anyone trying to go east out of Parkdale on a bike is going to have to handle this bad boy. And this thing puts cyclists in the hospital all the time. This is a very reliable cyclist killing road. It's really perfect for taking at about 50 kilometers an hour in a car. And as this cyclist is demonstrating, you want to get the hell off this road as soon as possible. This person's probably getting ready to get on this part of the sidewalk, though, so that they can bike straight through. And fortunately, there's loads of sidewalk space here, really. So this one's not so bad, just because police know that cyclists aren't really allowed to use this road, and that they have to. So it's like, if cops Like basically every time cops pull over somebody for cycling through here, they're basically entrapping the cyclist because the other option is to take up more room than you need. So this is one of it's not so bad, but only because it's so easy to safely break the law. There's no way to safely go through this on a bike. Period. I'm gonna say period. So King sucks, and East Liberty, not so bad. It's really not so bad. You know, East Liberty Street, although all the streets that it leads to are terrible, and I'm not going to get into those, but trust me, everywhere that you can go from here is completely terrible, but, well, almost everywhere. You can go on to Wellesley, actually, and Wellesley is a pretty damn good street for heading east. And you can, you know, fairly easily get into the Fort York area and then take this bike path to the east as well. And you can, you know, get down to the waterfront. It's just this whole segment here, this is like 3 minutes in hell, no matter what you do. So just have your pollution mask ready and hat with a wide brim if it's a sunny day, because this is car hell. East Liberty, though, it's not too terrible if you don't mind getting through this stretch where drivers like to do 50 kilometers an hour and run you off the road, and then this intersection where you will never ever have your right of way as a cyclist. It just evaporates. So sometimes it takes a couple of lights to get through here. It's usually it's dead simple but scary as hell, and sometimes it's just so safe that it's surprising. But, you know, of course, getting to Parkdale from here, you have to go through one of these, you know, where they're like, yeah, drivers are so good at, you know, sharing space with cyclists while yielding to them that we're just going to get them to cross over the cyclist's path so that we can avoid putting in a protected intersection here, which basically would just mean, like, a chunk of something there. So that you can't drive straight through right here, and a setback white line here, setback white line there, and like sort of a roundabout. Like if you're a cyclist or a pedestrian, it ends up being a roundabout with like a protected island here, so you're cycling through here and going straight, or cycling through here and going right, and then there's this blob, not right here, but like, because the crosswalk wouldn't be here, the crosswalk would be back here. It'd be this blob here preventing drivers from cutting you off, so that they would actually have to move up to like way over to here. So for them, the corner isn't rounded at all. Like this rounded corners thing is an everybody killer. And protecting intersections starts with kind of figuring out where the tip would be if it wasn't rounded. So like right there, putting an island there that protects cyclists as they're coming around and as they're going through here, so that they basically, cyclists just have to go over here, and then they can yield to whatever driver is already turning there or there, and then they totally have the right of way, and there's no real way that drivers can mess with them while they're crossing here like that because of these little islands. So since we're not going to protect our intersections, which is where most collisions occur and where most cyclists get killed, we've got these ridiculous crossover spots, which are a great way to just tell cyclists to go home. There's no way that that the average driver would switch to having to bike through this lane, and this is precisely the problem. We're making bike lanes for the like most skilled and most confident and most, dare I say it, daredevil type cyclists, and those are the cyclists that are currently using our roads because they're so dangerous. So we've got this filter on which types of cyclists are going to use these roads in the first place, and then the infrastructure we install is built for like the driver's perception of what those people are like, which is off, and then also it's so far away from what any common driver would be willing to use on a bicycle. So we need to be designing cyclist infrastructure that drivers can say yes to switching to, right? Which apparently 2/3 of them already want to, which doesn't surprise me because when I was a driver, that's all I wanted. I was like, wow, these, I could really have a great time biking to work, except that everything has been sectioned off for me, and all the drivers that want to compete with me for this space, even though we don't really need all this space. So I kind of do believe that statistic. And it's roads like these that keep drivers frustrated with driving and also keep them from being able to say, oh yeah, I could do that on my bike. Because I don't know any drivers who could say yes to cycling any of the routes that I bike. Because they're all just too sketchy. And I can handle it because like I made myself get extremely good at this and went through all, extremely good at commuting. Like I made myself into like a pro commuter because I was just not willing to take the TTC. There's these people who are just, they for whatever reason are unwilling or unable to do anything else, and so they get really good at this thing that's completely discouraged, even though it's like the way to do something, like the normal right way to do something. So here we are with people from Parkdale having to deal with this every time they go to Kensington Market. Like the Parkdale to Kensington Market thing is just so big. Like Parkdale residents love hanging out in Kensington Market and vice versa. They both love hanging out in Trinity Bellwoods Park. People from Parkdale go back and forth to Little Portugal like it's no thing at all, and it isn't a thing unless you're walking or cycling. That is so stupid.